So we begin today's Raj Yoga class. I'm sorry I'm a bit late. There were some issues here regarding Swami Tripurananji's discharge, and I was a bit busy, so maybe you had to wait a little while. Anyway, everything has been sorted out. So we come to the topic now, which is you remember last time we had discussed a very important thing. Swamiji says, when he was discussing pratyahara and a little bit of dharana, why multitasking is not good for yogis. Anybody who wants to practice Raj Yoga has to avoid multitasking. Now, multitasking is supposed to be a very good thing when you come to modern management and when you come to the as far as worldly prosperity is concerned, multitasking can be very good. But as Jesus very clearly and unequivocally said, God and mammon cannot go together. We have to choose. There comes a time in life when you have to make an option. You have to choose an option. You can't have the best of both worlds. You see, our scriptures have been crying hoarse, telling us these two things cannot coexist. You cannot have worldly prosperity and at the same time try to realize God. You have to give up one goal. So when Jesus said, perhaps people did not believe him and even crucified him when he said God and mammon cannot go together, because people who were to be his followers, they of course responded to his call and followed him. But there were quite a few who came to him initially, and if you see, they refused to give up everything for the Lord, for God, because they were so fond of their possessions. So Jesus also made a remark when he told them, see, he loves his possessions more than me, and that's why he is refusing to come, though he was impressed by Jesus, seeing other people just following him. But only 12 fishermen, as you all know, most of them were fishermen. And Swamiji makes a remark, these 12 people blew up the entire Western world. Blew up in the sense they showed the dominance of spirit over matter. So in Raj Yoga, Swamiji makes it very clear. We discuss some of the quotations which very often are quoted, and people think that what Swamiji said, they take it out of context and they want to show that Swami's quotes are meant for excellence in secular life, in our worldly life. If that were so, the people who excel in secular life, some of them are very well known, Hitler and all, they were great generals, Napoleon, there were so many, to name a few, who thought that their intelligence, their skill, and the worldly wisdom they had, wisdom, no, we cannot call it wisdom, the worldly skills, so which comes from multitasking. They do some things better than others. There may be a professor, there may be a scientist, or even a surgeon or a doctor who thinks the skill is all that is required in spiritual, in life, and through skill you can do everything. But no doubt it can give you worldly prosperity, but then one has the choice. When one comes to Raj Yoga, Swamiji makes it very clear that you cannot have both. If you think that you can have a little bit of spirituality and a little bit of the world and think that you will excel in both, no, it's not possible. So multitasking may be good. Multitasking may be good for one's career, doing so many things at a time and trying to manipulate things. You know, politicians very often do it. There are other industrialists who are apparently idolized because of their success in life. So that success is admired, and people go after success not knowing what true success is. So here, when we speak of Raj Yoga, Swamiji deliberately takes us through the three stages of consciousness, the conscious state, the subconscious state which we do mechanically, where most of our skills are there. A good athlete or a good surgeon or a good doctor, most of the things which he does is a thing of practice. Even a professor who teaches, maybe because of his routine, because it is a routine job, he has been teaching the same over and over again, same thing over and over again. So all his learning or all his teaching has become, or all his skill which worldly people acquire, they have become automatic with them, and it has become a skill which they don't have to consciously do it. Unconsciously, their skill, their hard training which they do, no doubt it requires a hard training to be even skilled as a footballer or as a surgeon or any other person in life. To be successful, one has to be highly skilled. So that's why yoga karmasu kaushalam, there's another very big mistake people make when they interpret this. Karmasu kaushalam means skill and dexterity in work. Now what does dexterity in work mean? People normally think dexterity in work means you can multitask, you can do so many things at a time and then gain worldly prosperity, earn money or do whatever you want in the world. That is not skill in work. If that is skill, then Arjuna was simply wasting his time. He was already skilled. He was one of the best generals of those times. He could defeat the entire Kaurava army single-handedly. He was so powerful, so skilled. So when Sri Krishna tells him yogaha karmasu kaushalam, he definitely did not mean archery or any skill he possessed. Had it been so, then he would not have got confused when he fell down at the feet of Sri Krishna and said, no, I am totally confused now, what should I do? What should I do and what should I avoid? And he asked so many questions, and the whole Gita is just a sermon trying to convince Arjuna about certain skills which are spiritual skills. They are not, definitely not worldly skills, because everybody knew that Arjuna was one of the most skilled in his profession. There could not have been a better warrior than him. And how could he get confused? That is the question one asks. So the confusion was in the spiritual side. So that's why we come to the main point, that though multitasking may be good for worldly prosperity, because the more skills you have, the more money or the more prosperity you can have, and the more ego gets inflated. And you think you have achieved the whole thing. Even Napoleon thought, even Alexander thought he had conquered half the world. And then finally, when he was returning, when the soldiers were tired, he just managed to hold a lump of clay in his hand, and he said, this is what finally is going with me. What has happened to the entire territory that I have conquered? Now all that is left I can hold on to is a handful of dust. When he was sick on his deathbed, he came to the conclusion that this is all, even that handful of dust he cannot take with him. So much for worldly prosperity and worldly skill. So when Sri Krishna says yoga karmasu kaushalam, that means dexterity in work, that is not skill in work. Skill not to get attached. The work which you do will attach you to gross things, and that skill which avoids you getting attached to the gross is real skill. How you prevent yourself from being fooled by this world and being either in management there is a wonderful term they use, either carrot or stick. So if you hang the carrot, the rabbit, of course there are two ways to entice a person to go after worldly pleasures. One is the carrot and the other is the stick. You do out of fear, or maybe you do out of reward. These are the two greatest motive forces which makes a person absolutely go after these things and sacrifice a lot. No doubt it entails even to whether he is afraid of the stick or whether he is enticed by the carrot. In both the cases, the skill, without developing the necessary skills, it is not possible. And with single-minded devotion, of course, it has to be done. But then the end result of all that is the sense of lack of fulfillment, because if fulfillment was there, then he would not have gone after more and more things, more and more prosperity, more and more skills. And when you reach the ultimate, as Alexander found out when he came to the end of his life, he found that after all the effort he had taken to develop his skills, to develop his army, to march through countries and kill so many people, finally what he achieved was betrayal from his own soldiers who refused to go because they were away from home for a long time. They did not want this, just going on conquering. And then finally he came to the conclusion that now you see, I have to leave everything behind. So here very clearly Sri Krishna, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras also, Swamiji points out that it is not in the interest of a yogi to be doing multitasking. Dharana means focusing on one point to the exclusion of all other things. Pratyahara was withdrawing. Pratyahara is the first step. Of course, even if we achieve some degree of pratyahara, it is a great achievement because that reduces our tendency to multitask. We just don't get involved in hundreds of things, and most of the things which we get involved in, and we try to do everything perfectly, and then we end up becoming an emotional wreck. That's what happens when you attempt, because multitasking is not suited to the human mind. The mind can do only one thing at a time, and though it appears that he is doing so many things at a time, there is a fraction of a second where the attention span changes from one to another, and that can be exceedingly taxing for a person and can cause a lot of anxiety and other psychosomatic diseases, including mental disorders. So though finally it is a case of burnouts. Now there is a term which is management people use, because the executives and all these important people who are totally wedded to their cause and they have no time for rest, they're just running around something which they themselves do not know what it is. And when finally they achieve that, they want something more, and that creates a lot of tension in their minds. And the result of this multitasking, which they have to do if you want success in this world especially, the child has been right from childhood, if you see, the child is told. In fact, I feel very sorry when I see the syllabus. Every year you will find that the children, there's so much of academic pressure imposed upon them. There's a competition when the child is too young, he's just young enough, old enough to just start learning, and then you find so many books and so many things, so many multitasking he has to do. And to keep up with the Joneses, as the proverb goes, people will be people, if they have the if they can afford it, they will put the child to, oh, you have to do riding, you have to do swimming, you have to do this, you have to do that, and they want excellence, and they pressurize that poor child, killing all sorts of creativity. They make him academically excellent, but he loses the soul. So this is the warning Swamiji gives when he speaks about dharana, that dharana is quite opposed to worldly concentration. If that were so, the most concentrated scientist would have become a yogi. What is the difference between a yogi and a scientist like Newton? They were also focused. They also did dharana, but they did dharana on the wrong thing. If you do dharana on the wrong thing, you get the fruit, but you get a worldly fruit. It's very clear. That's why we'll come to the topic of sanyama. Sanyama comes after dharana. The sanyama means you focus on a thing, and the more you focus, the more you identify with that thing. If you focus on war, you will be a warmonger. If you focus on politics, you will be a politician. If you focus on science, you will be a scientist. It's fine. There's nothing wrong. That's how the world is going on. And you will find that's why there's so many clashes, because that one person focuses on a thing and he thinks that is the most right thing to do. And the parents, suppose they're doctors, they would want their children to become doctors because they feel this is the right thing to do. Or maybe they'll force the children to become something which they don't want to. That is because the dharana, which they have just taught the children the art of dharana, but dharana on what? What is that on which we should focus? Now that is very important. You just can't tell a child, you just go on asking him to focus. The result is that he is a totally, I mean, he not only knows how to, he does not know how to conduct himself in life, because life skills are as important as academic skills. Now this is a very important fact, and one of the life skills is to live in a detached way. That is what yoga teaches. Patanjali Yoga says, first allow him, give him some spiritual knowledge, and then let him acquire skills, whatever skills he wants. He can not only do it better, but he will be detached. He will not be. But unfortunately, the parents make so much fuss about academic skills. They just want the child to be the brightest in the school, the brightest everywhere. And they make him an excellent person, but he is a psychological wreck. It's a fact. And this people don't understand. The competition which you see outside makes people run after these things, and there is competition, so there will be stress, and then they will do multitasking. That causes more stress, and they not only destroy themselves, but they destroy people around them. So that is what is the warning. The warning which Swamiji says, that you can't reach this superconscious state by just jumping from the subconscious level. So the skill which we develop is subconscious. We have not consciously done it. We have just done it as robots. A robot is the most skillful thing in the world. It never makes a mistakes. So we are nothing short of robots if we conscious on our subconscious skills. He says you have to go to conscious level. You have to be aware of things around you. You have to be aware of others' feelings. You have to have empathy for others. You have to have life skills. And if you don't have that, then all the subconscious skills which you have acquired, they just don't make any sense. They do not make you a better person by any standards. You can become a good professor or an academician or a sportsman. Any field you can excel, but that doesn't guarantee that you will be a good person. So Yogi says, the Yogi, Patanjali's yoga says, you have to consciously do all your actions. First, for that you have to leave multitasking and do dharana on something which is of the nature of pure spirit, not matter. They don't say that you don't focus on matter. If you focus on matter, you will become matter. So you cannot have God and mammon at the same time. What it means is, you can't focus on wealth, you can't focus on a worldly career, and at the same time become spiritual. Those two things do not go. Only Jesus was more direct, Buddha was more direct. Gita tells you in a very, very shrewd way. It doesn't want to disappoint a lot of people who think worldly. They want to, Sri Krishna believes that let them pass through their karma, and when they get disgusted with these worldly things, that is a more natural way. Whereas Jesus and the Christianity and Buddhism doesn't have the patience to tell. They just say you have to renounce. You can't have both things. But Hinduism is a bit liberal in the sense, they say, okay, that is your limitation. Okay, have some worldly prosperity. And when you are really ripe, when Thakur also says in the gospel, when the wound is fresh, you should not try to peel off the skin. When it dries totally, then you remove it, then your wound will heal. I mean, the skin will heal. But otherwise, if it is fresh. So people who are just motivated to get some kind of worldly success, if you just tell him on his face that this is totally against yoga, totally against spirituality, perhaps he will feel dejected. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, now you fight, but know for certain that as long as you have attachment, however great a general you may be, the end will be misery. And he had to pass through that stage because he was not ready. Not because Sri Krishna misguided him, he guided him properly, saying that now you are just in the kindergarten of spiritual life. You fight this war and see the consequences for yourself. It was a very costly lesson Arjuna had to learn. When he lost his children, when he lost, Pandavas also had to suffer a lot. The war never benefited anyone. But since it was inevitable, since everybody was determined to get worldly prosperity, they went ahead with the war, found the consequences for both of them. The consequences were not good, and then with the hope that they will take to spirituality, then they will realize that God and mammon cannot, spirituality and materialism cannot go together. So this is the reason Swamiji says you cannot jump from the subconscious to the superconscious state. Though people may like to do that. Many worldly people are promised, many of the gurus, modern gurus say you can get instant samadhi. You just do whatever you like, follow any profession, do as much, enjoy the world as much as possible, just do these few things and you will get instant nirvana. This is all humbug. It cannot be, it is not possible, definitely it is not possible, because otherwise Jesus and all these great prophets would have told us, though it is possible for one's to have worldly prosperity and at the same time spirituality. So one has to choose and make the right choice if really one wants spirituality. Otherwise, Hinduism allows you have dharma, artha, kama, whatever you want, you have, suffer the consequences, and when you come to spirituality, then you don't make a compromise. So yoga here, Swamiji's quotes have to be used in this context, that all the success he is speaking of is a success of a yogi. So when he says do one thing, that's what we discussed last time, give away everything, don't do, I just want to just read that quotation. He says, those who want to be yogis, make one idea your life, think of it, dream of it, live on that idea, let the brain, muscles, nerves, every part of your body be full of that idea, and just leave every other idea alone. This is the way to success. Now this quotation cannot be applied. Here Swamiji is speaking very clearly in the context of yoga. Hold on to one idea means hold on to the spirit. Hold on to the reality of the eternal spirit, which is always going to be with you. We discussed in the Bhagavad Gita class also that Sri Krishna is promising Arjuna that whatever spirituality you have gained, you will not lose it. That's the only thing you take with you when you die. All other things you have to leave it behind. Whereas here Swamiji says, when he says if you want success, he is saying the success here means success in spirituality. If you want, then take up one thing and do it till you see the end of it. Here, understand, leave the distraction, shut your mind to outside influences and develop the truth within. So this is, in this context, it should be understood. And here multitasking cannot help, because here you have to focus on one thing to the exclusion of everything else. Because multitasking is possible when there is multiplicity, which we find in the world. In the world there are so many things. As Thakur used to put it, Kamini and Kanchan, these are the two things he has classified into, but it means many things. Kamini is attached to so many things. Kanchan doesn't just mean wealth. It is a desire to be prosperous, desire to own property, desire to own cars. There are so many things in Kanchan. It's not just money or gold or as it is translated. So also the lust does not just mean lust for a man or woman. It means so many things. Lust for so many hundreds of things which we see we want to possess. That is lust. So these two things, multiplicity comes when you see the multiplicity or diversity in the gross. Gross only, it is only in the gross that you see multiplicity. In the spirit there is no multiplicity. That's why when Jesus said God and mammon cannot be acquired at the same time, he means if you want mammon, you have to multitask. If you want God, you have to concentrate on one thing, and that is the spirit. And that is how success is attained. So Sri Krishna is very clear about what constitutes real success. So also yoga says if you want success, you don't nibble at so many ideas. That will divert you from the main goal. The yogi has to concentrate on the reality, the Purusha, the Satchidananda, whatever you choose as the ultimate truth, which is purely spiritual. So worship God in spirit as Jesus said, worship God in spirit. And by the spirit, you have to worship the spirit. You can't worship spirit by matter. It's not possible. That's why you have to imagine yourself as a spirit and worship him. Devam bhutva devam yajet. That is a wonderful Sanskrit quotation. Devam yajet means you can worship the God by becoming God yourself. What does it mean? You have to think of yourself as a pure spirit. Then you worship God who is the spirit, and then he will reward you. That is what the Bible also says. Worship the spirit by the spirit. So these are the same things, whether you take Bhagavad Gita, the gospel, or you go to the Bible or even Buddhism. Everybody says the unitary spirit is the only way, holding on to which you can get real success. So here Swamiji says, don't nibble here and there and be a slave to nature, but go beyond this sense life. Those who want to be yogis make one idea your life. It is in this context, he says, you take up one idea, follow it, and don't give it up till you succeed. We must go deeper. First, do not disturb the mind. Now, multitasking, the very nature of multitasking is to disturb the mind and disturb others. Do not associate with persons whose ideas are disturbing. Avoid places, foods, and even people that disturb you. Now, that is the reason why Christianity and Buddhism said monasticism is the only way, because they felt, why waste time and doing all these things, disturbing the mind and then trying to calm it down. So Buddha gave a solution. Of course, many worldly people were not prepared for it. That's the reason why many people, though they became monastics, joined the monasteries, they could not stay there, because they did not understand that the reason to embrace monasticism or go into these monasteries, or the Cenobites who went into the cell, some of the Christian fathers, they used to prefer solitude. There's so much of importance given to solitude. Thakur also says that. That is the only reason, is to focus on the spiritual goal. First of all, Swamiji says, do not disturb the mind. Do not associate with persons whose ideas are disturbing. Now, this can be felt. When a disturbed person is in your vicinity, you can see the effect of that person on you. That's why, then what's the reason? Why these kings and the great people, Ashoka and all, they got disgusted, and many of the kings renounced their kingdoms and went and surrendered to Buddha and joined the monasteries, the viharas as they were called. Why did they do that? Because Buddha unequivocally told all these people that if your mind is disturbed, no amount of trying will make you spiritual, can get. So not only that, your mind may not be disturbed, you may be calm, but if you are indiscriminately mixing with people whose minds are disturbed, then that can cause you a great problem. Not only that, Swamiji says, avoid places, foods. So he comes even to the question of food, because we don't understand why so much fuss is made about food. Why do some of the Vaishnava sects, they don't allow anybody to cook, not even their own relatives. They say, we have enough problems, let us cook our own food, because I don't want food to be cooked by disturbing people whose thoughts, vibrations they will leave some trace. Some trace will be there in the food they supply or the food they cook, and that if you consume. So they were so fastidious. That's why yoga is not for people who cannot avoid these places whose ideas are disturbing, where people, full of places where there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of disturbance. No doubt you can't avoid it totally, but as far as possible. That's why Thakur pleaded with Master Mahasaya. He said, can you not go to Nirjanvas for 3 days? Okay, you can't do for 3 days, go for 1 day. If you can't go for 1 day, at least for a few hours, you cut off yourself from the world. You may not be able to live in the monastery, but this solitude is so important that Swamiji says, first you have to go deeper. Do not disturb the mind. Do not associate with persons who are disturbing the mind. Avoid places, foods, and even people who disturb you. Practice hard and don't think of the result even if you die, but you have to be brave. So he knows, Swamiji knows, these are almost impossible conditions for a normal human being living in society. How can one get rid of, he may make his mind calm, but how can he not keep himself from associating with disturbing people? Now and then we'll be confronting them. Then how can we avoid eating food from disturbing people? We can't just cook every time. We can't cook our own food or get food cooked by good people, people whose minds are calm. If one can do that, then perhaps uh, if circumstances are fortuitous, maybe we get an opportunity to do that, but very, very rare where all these conditions are fulfilled. That's why gospel, which was mostly addressed to people living in the world who had so many problems, they could not avoid. Then Thakur said, can you not do Nirjan Vas? Can you not go to solitude now and then? That's the least he expected from the devotees, from the householders who asked him questions, why the mind can't be. Because he knew this is the reason. Yoga tells us the very clear reason that to go deeper, to practice dharana, we have first to stop disturbing our own mind. That is in our hands. We can do that. But that is not enough, because with that calm mind, if you mix with people whose minds are disturbing, then somehow or the other it will influence you. Then you have to struggle again, go back to make your mind calm, and even avoid places. That is obvious when some places are meant for creating disturbance. That's why people used to go to the forests, go to the monasteries, go to a calm and quiet place. But unfortunately, when they go there, they don't go with a calm mind. So they take the whole world with them. With a disturbed mind, even a calm place can be disturbing. That is another. That's why Swamiji first mentions that do not disturb the mind. First, your mind should be calm, and then mix with people whose ideas are not disturbing, who are at least as calm as yourself. Avoid places and foods, or at least eat foods which are sattvic. There is a list of foods given in the 14th chapter of the Gita. What are the conditions for eating food which can purify your mind? It should be cooked by people of a wholesome mind, a happy mind, or at least a pure mind. It should be sattvic by nature. There are two things. One is it should be cooked by people or associated with people who are having some basic purity and basic control of the mind. The second thing is the intrinsic nature of the food. Sometimes the food by itself is rajasic. Some foods are tamasic, like stale food. You see that there is a nice list given in the Bhagavad Gita in the 14th chapter. What is sattvic faith, what is rajasic faith, what is tamasic faith. So also he gives what is sattvic food, ahara, not just food which we take through the mouth, but sattvic things which we get in through our senses. What are those? And what are rajasic things? Which are the thoughts which make us rajasic, and which are the thoughts which make us lazy, tamasic and indolent? So Swamiji says, religion is a mere entertainment for tamasic people whose minds are not fixed on any idea for a long time. They may boast that they are multitasking, but it is the fickleness of the mind which they are trying to glorify. They want to glorify the fact that they can do so many things at a time. A juggler can do it. Most of these jugglers who do jugglery, normal people can't do it because they have trained themselves. They can do so many things. They can toss 6 or 7 balls from the left hand to the right hand and just go on juggling. And we think what's a marvelous feat. But it's all unconscious action which they have been practicing for years together. And that has become a habit. So they have been stuck at the subconscious state, subconscious level. And their minds are always bubbling. Along with the juggling, their minds are also bubbling. They may be very skilled and people think, oh, what a great concentration this person has. No, but it's not concentration, because Swamiji says religion is merely entertainment for tamasic people whose minds are not fixed on any idea for a long time, to the exclusion of everything else. I mean the spirit, things which do not change, things which are constant, things which are eternal, things which will go with you. These are the things which make a person a yogi. They want to hear about religious talks as mere amusement. So they are not satisfied with one talk. They want to hear more and more things, more and more varieties, because it's just like food. If you ask somebody like the rishis, they used to eat very simple food again and again, because they did not live to eat. They ate just to live. They just wanted to give the body enough energy to survive another day and survive in a nice way with good health. So they ate very little. They didn't mind if they ate the same thing, whatever was available, instead of wasting time. But if you eat for amusement, if you live to eat, if eating is one of the main occupations of your life, then you go on cooking dishes, hundreds of dishes, spending so much of time just cooking and then maybe eating it in 15 minutes. Sometimes people have to work hard to cook a nice dish for several hours, and finally you just gobble it or eat it in 15 minutes. So that shows how much of time is wasted. So in a way, Swamiji says, people also gobble all these things, many thoughts, many ideas they want. They are not satisfied with one thing and they don't want to practice that one thing. Take up one idea, when Swamiji says follow it, means take up one spiritual idea, just follow it and then go on doing it. That's why Ishta, the idea of Ishta was created. They knew that the Guru, if he says this is the Ishta, this is the mantra, then you just forget about other things. Just focus on that and repeat it. But how many people, how many of us can do that? We think other things are also necessary. No doubt, that is the restlessness of the mind which is reflected, and we want more and more things. We go on doing these things and then don't find satisfaction and then complain that we are not making progress. One simple thing the Guru has given, and that is the mantra. So how many times do we repeat? Brahmananji, some brahmachari once asked Brahmananji, I've been doing japa, but I'm not getting peace of mind. He knew. He said, how many times have you been doing japa sincerely, with full attention, with like dharana? The dharana is, the repeating of the japa is nothing but dharana. You're focusing on the Ishta using the mantra. He said a few thousand times. He said, if you regularly do it for 2 years and then if you don't get any result, you can come and slap me. The Guru is telling the disciple, brahmachari. He said, have you done it? Just persist do it at least for 2 years. We don't have the patience. We don't mind spending 7 years, 10 years to acquire a degree, to become an accomplished academician or an accomplished doctor or an accomplished engineer or accomplished scientist. 7, 10, 12, 15 years, you are still a baby in your career. And people don't mind spending years and years and years and years developing a skill. Whereas when it comes to spirituality, they do not want to try for long periods. So Brahmananji is saying, have you done it for 2 years? Just 2 years. Do the japa consistently the way I have told you, and then if you don't get any result, come and slap me. That is what he promised. So much faith Brahmananji had in the power of the mantra, but there's no point in blaming anybody if we don't do this thing. One has to practice and one has to do it consciously. We do not do it consciously. If we do it just as a skill, then it is just like a multitasking thing which you are doing in the world. Instead of those things, we are just doing the mantra mechanically and then we complain we are not achieving anything. Are we doing it consciously? Are we doing with full awareness? We don't ask this question ourselves. So that's why Swamiji says, they cannot fix, these tamasic people cannot fix their mind on a particular thing for a long time, and they want to hear about religious talks as mere amusement. So just as we have so many amusements, diversity, the nature of amusement is diversity. What is amusement? People are not fed up of one thing. Okay, then they'll say, well, let us go for a picnic, let us go for something else, because they don't want to do the same thing over and over again. Somebody was asking Why can't you change the Aarti monthly? Or we have this Khandana, I think you know, in most of the centers all over the world, at a specific time, the same Aarti set to the same tune and with the same meaning, of course. So it is a standard thing which Swamiji thought I should introduce before leaving this world. He knew the fickleness of the human mind. So he made a rule that this Aarti should be sung, Khandana, Bhava Bandhana. It's a nice hymn which gives the essence of Sri Ram Krishna, the deity whom people worship. So his followers, they are asked to do it at a fixed time after sunset or maybe around sunset to do this hymn. Then there is Sarva Mangala and there is Om Reem Ritam. There are 2 or 3 hymns which have become a part of the Ramakrishna tradition. Why is it? Can we not sing different things? There are so many wonderful hymns. You can do it, no doubt. But whatever you do, first you have to finish it. In fact, in Nagpur, there is a wonderful center in Nagpur. They hardly sing any bhajans after that. They say the whole mood goes if you sing too many bhajans. Then people will like to demonstrate their skills. And then they have bhajan mandalis, and then they just one person will sing and the other person will join in and he'll try to show that he's singing better. And then it becomes a competition. You forget. We don't even think what the main stotras, Khandana and other things, Om Rim Ritam, what do they mean? Do they transform us? When we say that, what is the mind with which we say that? Are we focusing? Because these were introduced by Swamiji, knowing our fickle mind. He said at least have few things uniform in the whole order or among devotees. Even in the private centers, you will see this is one item in the big Bhav Prachar Parishad all over India. One of the conditions is that you should have this prayer, because Swamiji has introduced this with some thought. The great yogi that he was, he knew that if you cannot fix your mind on a particular idea for a long time, your yoga, there is a sutra, we'll come to that sutra. Satu Dirgha Kala Nairantaryam. Dirgha Kala means for a long time. Nairantar means again and again, again and again. So the main point here is, first of all, it should be done for a long time. That is the mantra. Then done again and again. Repeat. You go on repeating. It's in the repetition that the merit is there. That's the real success lies. It's not in the type of mantra which you have. No doubt the mantra has some intrinsic power, but it is the meditation. It is the repetition of the thing again and again. Japat Siddhi, Holy Mother said, just do japa and see whether you progress or not. People simply don't have patience, and then Raja Maharaj said, you just have not practiced for even a few months and you come and say that you are not making progress. But first of all, have you done your spiritual practices constantly? Nairantaryam, again and again. Dirgha Kala, for a long time. So, the Yoga Sutra says, then the practice becomes Drudha Bhumi. Drudha Bhumi means you are on firm ground. You are firmly grounded in your sadhana and then nothing can shake you. So, Satu Dirgha Kala Nairantaryam, you do the same thing for a long time, uninterruptedly. When you do that, then some result is shown in your life. Some transformation takes place. So, Swamiji says, to succeed one must have tremendous perseverance, because the result will not come in one day. I will drink the ocean, says the persevering soul. At my will, mountains will crumble up. Have that sort of energy and that sort of will. Work hard and you will reach the goal. Now, the goal here again is spiritual. You have to remember this again and again. Because if anybody takes this stray quotation, as I said, and says, that sort of energy I have, and then I became a billionaire and I use this for that, and say, you see, I have not given up till I became a billionaire. I had hardly a few thousand pounds, and then I went on, and at my will, mountains will crumble up. So such people also use their willpower, but for something very gross, which they don't have the wisdom to understand that they have to leave everything behind when they leave this planet. Not a single penny they can take with them. So what's the use at your the willpower which you had, which you have used to gain these things, gain these secular fruits which you may be enjoying for some time, but then most of the people who have that kind of willpower, they don't even have time to enjoy what they have earned. And by the time they finish with their life, when they come to the end of the life, they find they have accumulated many things which they just have to leave behind, which they could not even enjoy 1/10 of or 1/100th of what they have earned. They could not even spend it because they hardly had time to spend. They were so bothered about uh, the perseverance was there. Swamiji says tremendous will was there that I will drink the ocean. Otherwise, they would not have earned that kind of money. They have been after it, no doubt, with all their energy. But here Swamiji says this energy, if it is directed towards something which is going to last eternally, the spiritual life, the life of the spirit, the super consciousness, if that is the goal, through for which you have to pass through the conscious and then reach the super conscious, then only you will reach the goal. So now we come to the next topic after dharana, dhyana and samadhi. So for dhyana and samadhi, I discussed these things, the difference between the subconscious, conscious and the superconscious. Superconsciousness, when you talk of samadhi, it can occur only when you reach the superconscious state of mind. It cannot happen when you are conscious on the conscious plane, and the least possibility is when you are in the subconscious plane. Though for the world, when you excel in even in the subconscious activities, you are nothing more than a mere machine, and that people admire and people go after, but they do not even know that they have not done this, they have not even reached the second stage, that fully conscious state, and after consciousness comes the superconscious state. So that is far off, very, very far off. So one can be a great skilled person in the world, but can be a spiritual pygmy. He can be a spiritual pygmy. In the spiritual world, he can know absolutely nothing about the spirit, about the eternal nature of the spirit. So Latu Maharaj was an uneducated person, a pure shepherd boy, but he was full of the wisdom of the spirit thanks to Thakur's grace, and he did not miss secular knowledge. Of course, there were some like Swamiji who had some kind of secular knowledge, they excelled in that, and that was enough to shake the whole world. But it's not the secular knowledge. In fact, if you see the marks of Swami Vivekananda, if you see the academic excellence, he hardly got good marks in the college. But that doesn't mean that has no connection with the spiritual progress he made. He was focusing more on the spiritual side of life, development of his personality than the academic side, though he did not neglect, because his father, like all other parents, would have told him that he needs a degree to get a good job, he needs to become a lawyer, just as he thought was the end all and everything of life. And fortunately, he came across Sri Ramakrishna, who, though he did not dissuade him from studying these things, that came in useful, because Thakur knew that the academic knowledge which Swamiji is acquiring now is going to help him when he goes to the West and has to explain things in the English language. So he didn't discourage him, because he believed that he would be a world teacher one day. So he said, to kill yourself one pin is enough, but to kill others you need a sword. So this sword is nothing but this academic knowledge. But after acquiring academic knowledge, without wasting much time thinking that is the sole purpose of life, if we focus on spirituality, then the value of that academic knowledge can be enhanced, or it can be used. But Swamiji, when he came to Thakur, he understood the futility. So he said, Thakur, please give me he said, I wish I had some medicine which would make me unlearn what I learnt in the university. Because he realized that that was causing a lot of mental blocks. He was not able to have faith. He was not able to have the guileless faith which Nag Masha and others had. So he knew that this is a limitation. And all the while I was thinking that through philosophy, by reading the different poets like Wordsworth and Hegel, Kant, and all the great philosophers of the West, I could get spiritual, and he found become spiritual. And they listened to the sermons of Devendranath Tagore and all the great Brahmo leaders who had even impressed the Queen. So these great Rajaram Mohan Roy and all those people he had heard, Keshav Chandra Sen, not Rajaram Mohan Roy, Keshav Chandra Sen. So he thought, oh, this is academic excellence is very necessary. But he found, or even this Keshav Sen comes to Thakur like a spiritual child. His knowledge in front of Sri Ramakrishna's knowledge, who did not even go to school, was phenomenal, and that transformed him, and that convinced Naren that yoga is not something where the worldly knowledge can be of any use. In fact, one has to first acquire spirituality and then use this worldly knowledge, which he did in the West. He had tried to explain it in a rational way as much as possible. That came later on, but preaching was not in his mind when he was trying to get spiritual wealth from Sri Ramakrishna. He said, no, I don't want this, I just want to go into samadhi and attain spiritual experience first. I don't want to teach. But Thakur knew that mother had prepared him, made him pass through the academic curriculum just because that he would have to take the message and explain it to the so-called intelligentsia of the world. And that is what he did, because it's difficult. Swamiji says it's easy to teach a illiterate person the spiritual things because he will grasp it, but it's very difficult to crack intelligent people's mind. They just don't, there's so much of resistance. That is why a simple and guileless faith was appreciated by Sri Ramakrishna. He had a few disciples like Subodhananda, and he said it is the result of tapasya of several lives that one is born with a guileless mind. People think that if they have a very sharp and crooked mind, they will do well in the world. They may do well in the world with that crooked mind of theirs, but spiritually you will still remain a pygmy. Intelligence really doesn't matter when it comes to spiritual life. This is a very hard fact, but unfortunately, we still, the glory of academic excellence and other things, they just spoil the heads of most of the people. And that not only spoils their heads and they inflates their egos, but they feel that they understand everything of spirituality as well. And they think they don't need advice, especially when they understood Sri Ramakrishna is an illiterate person from the village, said, what can I learn from this person? That's what even M thought when he thought, oh, maybe he has read lot of books, but that simple maid servant who asked him to go inside said, no, he doesn't need to read books. Everything is in his mind. You see the simple faith of this person, maid servant, who understood Thakur and accepted him and this M was under the impression when he first met him that how can a person who is not even gone to school, not even gone to college and doesn't have university degrees can teach anything about spirituality. So the first question he asked in the gospel was, has he read many books? And that lady understood. He said, what books? He doesn't need to read books because he has gained all the knowledge from experience. So Swami Vivekananda said, we like foolish people went to the university and gathered second-hand knowledge which has been classified, compiled and put in print form by certain professors, and that we borrow from them. Maybe add a little thing, scientists may add a little thing, make some progress. But he says, after all, it is second-hand knowledge. Whereas the scientist that Sri Ramakrishna was, Swamiji says, he learnt his lessons from the University of Nature. Prakriti taught him whatever he needs to learn, and that knowledge was perfect because there cannot be a better teacher or a better guide or better university than nature itself, because nature teaches us the right thing, and it's only the human mind, the confused human mind, which goes against nature and creates a havoc. That's what we see the whole planet is doing now, and we are suffering the consequences of that. It's our greed, it's our arrogance, which has made us think that by science and by all these things we can solve all the problems of life, whereas we are not able to solve even a small problem. Something goes, some new problem comes, and we keep on struggling to find solutions, eternal solutions for our temporary problems. We get temporary solutions, but the eternal solution can be found only through the path of yoga. So this is what Swamiji says when he says, all ethics, all human action, all thought hang upon one idea of unselfishness. Unselfishness towards the world. Why should one be unselfish? What is the necessity, force or power of by being unselfish? What do I gain? I see all around me that it's the selfish people who apparently seem to be making lot of money, lot of apparent worldly success. So why don't we follow them? Why don't we just have a mad race for success along with them and be selfish and just don't care for others? If that is the law, then where do these saints stand? Because Jesus was unselfish, because Buddha was unselfish, because Sri Ramakrishna was unselfish, the spiritual truths have come from their mouth and they are still sustaining humanity. The great scriptures of the world. These were unselfish people. So Swamiji says people want a reason. Everybody, the scientists want, why should I be unselfish? Why can't I destroy nature if it helps me, my greed? Why can't I destroy the lakes, the rivers, the environment, the ecology? I don't care as long as it makes me wealthy. What is the harm? I want to be rich. Why should I not be selfish? Why should I not bother about what happens to other people if I can get my money? That's what this mad race inspired by selfish motive is creating such a horrible world. So Swamiji says, those who call themselves rational must show a reason for being unselfish. This answer cannot be given by an utilitarian. So you can't say what is the purpose of being unselfish. The very purpose is that if you want to survive, if you want eternal life, there is no other way. There is no shortcut to spirituality. So that is the great lesson Swamiji says. The transcendental state which comes as a result of uninterrupted unselfish acts by human beings over a period of time, by constantly thinking not of the world but of the Ishta, of the spiritual truth, of the consciousness which is eternal, and that makes us more and more unselfish and takes us towards the goal. So I'm sorry I was a bit late today, though I tried my best to come at 4:30. So I have compensated by taking 15 minutes more. So if there are some questions, you can kindly ask. I'm leaving it open. Yeah.
Hello, Pranam Swamiji.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, this is Himadri here.
Yes.
One of the aspect of Swamiji, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
probably highlight this or put forward this.
Yes.
In terms of the unconditional love for the motherland, and particularly the impact on the revolutionaries and the freedom fighters that he had at that point of time.
Yes.
We always try to discuss about the spiritual part of it,
Yes.
but I think he gave a lot of emphasis on that part.
Yes.
It will not be wrong to say that whatever we achieved in terms of independence or liberation, it was probably only because of him and the impact that he had
Yes.
on the revolutionaries particularly,
Yes.
and the freedom fighters of that time.
Yes.
Much of it has been forgotten and probably lost in the way.
Yes.
And that is why we are probably in the current situation where there is no spiritual awakening of the society. It is just political freedom.
Yes.
Social freedom is also and economic freedom is also a lot to be achieved.
And
So
spiritual freedom above all. So
above all,
spiritually,
spiritual
there is
freedom. Yeah.
absolutely no freedom. We are not free. Even if there is economic freedom, there is a tendency to be unselfish. And in the name of prosperity, some people become richer, the poor become poorer. So it's not just freedom, it's spiritual freedom is the guiding factor. And in spite of some of his teachings being taken by the revolutionaries for physical freedom, when Swamiji was told, this is very important, one of the questions he was asked when he was delivering his lectures from Colombo to Almora, you know what he said? This has to be remembered in this context, that his contribution towards the Indian freedom movement, though indirectly it was there, Nivedita inspired a lot of people, his disciple, though he himself directly did not do, because he knew that once he said, it's a very significant statement he made, and this he said in Chennai, I think Madras, when he has some of the youths wanted him to fight for the freedom. So he said, I can give you freedom. Remember, these words are very important. He said, I can give you political freedom tomorrow if I want, because he was so popular. He could have inspired instantly, leave alone in South India. In Calcutta, he would have inspired at least 10,000 people to just die for freedom. He could have done it, but he didn't do it. I'll tell you why. He said, I could give you freedom tomorrow. He did not even said you wait till 1947, which was the fact. We could have got it immediately after his Mahasamadhi. Because he knew of one shortcoming. He knew that all along political masters have changed in India. This is something which takes some time to understand. First, there were so many Hindu kings fighting with each other. Then the Mughals came. Then there was a fight for supremacy by the Europeans. And all along, these political masters have changed. But the common man was not influenced so much because they held on to spirituality. There were some people like Sri Ramakrishna who did not even bother who the queen was. He didn't tell a single word. He did not even discuss. That's why when the newspaper was brought to his room, if you see the gospel, he said, just remove it from here. He could have easily said, why don't you people go and fight against the British? Because these things, they keep on changing. We had several masters. It's not just the economic slavery or the social, slavery was there right from beginning. Some foreign power or some internal power also, if they are tyrants, they created hell. They may be local people, but they were quarreling amongst themselves. So political freedom, social freedom, economic freedom, they have their own time, and it happens according to the law of nature. That's part of the whole thing. I'm not saying they are not important, but if the spiritual power was not preserved by a few people, Swamiji says India would have had the same fate as Greece, Rome, all the great political empires which were inspired from this. He made it very clear when he went to India. All the speeches, if you see, not a single quote you can get. That's why the British people, when they try to see his whole complete works, he never spoke of political freedom, though his inspiration was taken by the other people, and he did not mind that because that was a part of history which took place. But that was not his goal. He said, I can give you freedom tomorrow, but where are the men who can preserve that freedom and rule the country wisely? This he knew. Unless people are spiritually motivated, spiritually guided, you will find the same politicians in some other form looting the country. Though they are born as Indians, I am not saying they have to come from outside. You have traitors. You know what history is. Every country has a share of these people. So without character, without spirituality, he knew the new masters, whoever comes to power, one power will go, another power will come. But if the change is not done at the spiritual level, people will suffer, the common man will suffer. So we have to remember this thing. It may be forgotten, no doubt. It's not forgotten. There are some people who always keep that issue alive. There are so many good things done by other people also, scientists in the field of material science, Jagdish Chandra Bose, and so many hundreds of people have contributed in social fields. But Swamiji says India has not survived because of that. India has survived only because its spiritual core was intact. And the more you hold on to the spiritual core, which is eternal, then nothing temporal, though you may feel that kings are coming and going. But if it is based on politics, if it is based on political freedom, you will find that the whole thing will collapse. Okay? So let me take your leave. Somebody is knocking the door. Just a minute. So can I take your leave now? Maybe tomorrow we can continue. There is a class at 5:45. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.